These 7 points are crucial and are probably the only possible solution for the present threat of a general breakdown crisis of, first of all, the transatlantic system.
Number 1, the forced resignation of Barack Obama and immediate passage of Glass-Steagall.
The first step to global economic recovery is the forced removal of Barack Obama from the United States presidency and the immediate passage of the Glass-Steagall Act. In 2008, Barack Obama's election was paid for by some of the biggest British assets and financiers for the sole purpose of ensuring that the bailout policy would continue and that the sovereign power of the United States would be destroyed, and if that sovereignty was asserted, would be crushed by the executive. Obama was the prime choice for this, as he is a profiled pathological Hitlerian narcissist, whose psychological disorder was identified by Lyndon LaRouche in 2009. So what he's done in protecting the London and Wall Street monetary apparatus and sacrificing our people to do so should come as no surprise. He was chosen for that purpose. The entire global financial system is now terminally bankrupt, and the bailout policy in Europe and the United States has already been shown to be an utter failure. The consequences have been the hyperinflation of physical values, the accumulation of fictitious gambling debts that could never be paid, and the intentional targeting of the populations of the world to try to make them pay for it. Obama was placed in office for no other reason than to protect this system at the expense of the lives of his own people. Look at how his bailout of the insurance companies and the useless eaters policies in his health reform program turned out. Or his administration's promotion of the Federal Reserve's quantitative easing policy, which has already inflated the price of food and bailed out the banks. At the same time, he's turned a blind eye toward increasing joblessness and state bankruptcies all across the country. Two of the most conspicuous cases have been Obama's continuous and calculated political interventions preventing a restoration of the Glass-Steagall Act and the illegally launched Libya war. An example of the first and most criminal case occurred during the frivolous debt ceiling proceedings in which he intentionally sidelined the increased attention within Congress and across the nation for the Glass-Steagall Act in favor of raising the debt ceiling in order to make it legal to extend more bailouts. The deal not only created the basis for yet another bailout, but established Obama as the virtual dictator of the United States with the help of a 12-person super Congress to carry out the murderous austerity demanded by London and Wall Street against the American people. Secondly, the war in Libya was launched without congressional approval, which violated the War Powers Act and solidified his elevated status as a prime candidate for impeachment, the pursuit of which was only sidelined by the cowardice of Congress and the toleration of him by the American people. It should be clear by now that step one to any economic recovery of the United States and the world must begin with the removal of Barack Obama from office to remove the only true impediment to the reinstatement of the Glass-Steagall Act.
Number 2, division of fictitious from real liabilities according to the Glass-Steagall standard.
The reinstatement of Franklin Roosevelt's Glass-Steagall Law will give the United States the power to begin the biggest cleanup operation ever. The Glass-Steagall Law will allow us to identify and separate the legitimate liabilities of our nation from the fraudulent liabilities which are now weighing our financial system down. In separating the wheat from the chaff, we will discover the vast speculative debts of the merchant banking system which the United States has no obligation to honor. We will then return their debts back to their rightful owners. As starters, in December of last year we learned that beyond the initial criminal bailouts through TARP, near zero interest emergency loans by the Federal Reserve in the amount of $16 trillion were distributed among virtually every major bank and many large non-bank corporations, all in the name of the U.S. dollar. The United States has become the virtual debt slave in this process not only to the Wall Street banks, but the European banks as well, with the Fed in one instance buying $300 billion in financial paper from Deutsche Bank and Credit Suisse, This is the debt the United States has no obligation to honor. Certainly it is the case that with the repeal of Glass-Steagall in 1999, wild-eyed speculators and bosses of immoral international finance were unleashed to wreak havoc on the commercial banking system. Home mortgages, retirement funds, government funds, everything which still represented real physical value to the economy were all swallowed up as mere financial assets. But that took place on top of a U.S. economy that was already operating below break-even for 40 years, where an obvious physical debt has accumulated in our present lack of infrastructure, bankruptcy of cities and states, and inability to cope with natural disasters. With the power of the Glass-Steagall Act, all assets which fit into the merchant banking sector in accordance with the guidelines in the original 1933 Glass-Steagall Act will be left to fend for themselves. The bailouts will be given back to the merchant banking sector for them to deal with, and removed as national liabilities. They will get not one penny of bailout from the United States. These are gambling debts, and London and Wall Street's luck has just run out. What will be honored and defended will be valid liabilities of a commercial banking sector, like schools, pensions, fire and police departments, and personal savings. Which brings up the other part of the picture. Once Glass-Steagall has been implemented, what we are going to find is that we are left with very little in the good side of our banking system, because we waited too long to save it. The ratio of good money is tiny compared to bad money. Thus, in addition to what survived the purging of the financial system, the federal government must go from step 2 of our economic recovery, Glass-Steagall, immediately to step 3, the credit system created by Alexander Hamilton, embodied in our Constitution. This will allow the U.S. to utter credit, recapitalize the commercial banking system, and honor the real liabilities for an honest bailout of the struggling states, and for the nation as a whole.
Number 3. For lack of real assets remaining, issue Hamiltonian credit for national projects.
Step 3 to any economic recovery must be the establishment of the American credit system. Once the Glass-Steagall Act is reinstated and the separation of real assets from the fake ones take place, we'll find that the real assets remaining are not enough to finance an economic recovery and to rescue our bankrupt states. The U.S. Congress will have to shut down the Federal Reserve and convert it into a third national bank. This will then be the vehicle that, under Article 1 of our Constitution, will allow our government to utter bills of credit, developing our nation and recapitalizing the legitimate commercial banks. Rather than being indebted to a foreign entity like the private banking interests of London and Wall Street who control us through their control of money, the American credit system prescribes that the only debt we honor is the debt that we as a nation create to fund the building of the nation. The only legitimate investments are those which produce a multiplier effect through technological progress, characterized by increases in energy flux density and increases in the productive powers of labor. With a knowable future guarantee of increased physical wealth and productivity, we are free to borrow against that future we in the present intend to create, investing in building the pathway in the present which will carry us to that future. Money itself is merely a byproduct of the creative process of the creation of real wealth. The credit system is not a variation of a monetary system, but it is an expression of man's unique power to voluntarily bring new future states into being, a willful, creative self-evolution. It was Alexander Hamilton's understanding of this scientific principle which became the essence of our system of sovereign self-government, a revolutionary new system forged out of the fires of war against the British Empire. At the conclusion of that war, the United States found itself in a crisis which threatened our newly won but fragile independence. The country had gone into a vast debt to finance the war, but under the Articles of Confederation, with its loose alliance between 13 separate states, each with its own currency and constitution, this debt could not be paid. Some states were threatening to leave the Confederation, and the country was writhed with competition between large states and the smaller ones. We were not yet a unified nation. Alexander Hamilton, recognizing these early signs of disintegration, warned that the folly of the confederated systems of ancient Greece and feudal Europe would be our own under the Articles of Confederation. Under similar loose bonds, those once great confederations had been induced to wage war amongst themselves and were subverted by the private monetary systems that controlled them from the outside through their control over their money and debt. Hamilton, drawing on the precedent of the Pine Tree Shilling of Massachusetts Bay, knew that only a unified, constituted federal system endowed with the sovereign power to control and regulate money would be able to maintain not only political but economic independence as well from the monetarist systems of Europe. This sovereign power over money and credit became enshrined in Article 1 of our new federal Constitution, making our nation absolutely unique among all other nations of the world. Armed with this principle, the newly born federal government of the United States was then in the position to rescue the individual states, assuming their vast war debts and forming them into one single national debt, against which bills of credit could then be issued to invest in great projects for the physical development of the nation as a whole. Step 3 to any economic recovery must be the reestablishment of the American credit system by constituting an Alexander Hamilton-style Third National Bank. Our federal government will extend credit for specific productive investments, recapitalizing the legitimate commercial banks, and finally returning to an honest banking system. This will allow us to proceed to step 4, rescuing our bankrupt cities and states, reaffirming the original intent of Hamilton's federal system of government.
Number 4. The only bailouts will be honest bailouts for the bankrupt cities and states. With the Hamiltonian credit system in place, a system which reasserts the founding intention of our United States and allows for the creative process of the nation-state to take hold and provide the means to create real wealth, we must now begin step 4 of the economic recovery by reestablishing the proper relationship between the states and the federal government. Doing so will put the institutions of state and local governments into fully functional operation, functions upon which these communities' immediate survival depends. Under the presently dying monetarist system, we exist as 50 loosely associated territories, a disintegration from the original intention of our union of 50 states, unified by a strong federal government, which is capable of using a national banking system for the creation of true physical wealth. The United States, under this disintegration, have been left to fend for themselves, during which time the federal government, through the Federal Reserve, have spent trillions of dollars bailing out Wall Street and London banks, and President Obama promising the European banking system that the United States will be its lender of last resort. No national mission orientation, no federally directed productive driver, no form of legitimate revenue. Instead, the states are trapped within a system of generating so-called revenue in the form of high-risk mortgage-backed securities and other immoral schemes, whose failure leaves the states in an even greater state of destitution. Indebted to Wall Street banks, states are now in the monetarist death grip, forced into a suicidal downward spiral of self-cannibalization. The destruction heaped upon our communities through this austerity is astounding, and the amount of budget shortfalls and percentage of programs cut are but a shadow of the very real devastation and disillusionment felt by a great many of the American population. In the last 3 years of accelerating economic collapse, states have been forced to cut over $530 billion from their budgets. Nationwide, these billions of dollars translate to a 30% cut in Medicare and Medicaid, with states like Arizona cutting specific types of medical procedures to save money, directly resulting in the death of patients awaiting transplants and other life-saving medical procedures. In Florida, the tuition of state universities has been raised a whopping 52% over the past 3 years, coinciding with an equally devastating cut of funding for K-12 public schools by 30% across the nation. All of this done within a period where 188,000 school teachers have been laid off. Other state funding for municipal functions such as firefighters, police officers, and public health have been cut by 40% over the last 3 years. In January of this year, the Camden, New Jersey mayor fired 1/3 of the fire department and nearly 1/2 of the police department in a futile effort to balance the city's budget. As a result, by July of this year, the rate of assaults using a gun were up 60%. This devastation spares not one community and not one of our citizens. It is very real, and there is no end in sight without the immediate implementation of this proposal. With the states in such a dire situation, the newly established credit system and Third National Bank will allow the federal government to assume the legitimate debts of the states and issue credit based on that debt. As Hamilton used the opportunity of the great debt incurred by the states to fight the Revolutionary War to implement the principle of a national credit system, allowing for true sovereignty as a nation, we today will reassert this principle by initially extending an immediate emergency bailout of the states to salvage the rightful functions of the communities and municipalities. Doing so will not only fully fund these communities' schools, firehouses, and police departments, but more fundamentally, our people's identity as citizens of a great nation will have the life breathed back into it. The faith in our federal system of government, currently so much in doubt among a citizenry who feels forsaken, will once again be revived. Only then, once our sense of national identity is restored, will we be fully prepared to embark on Step 5, the immediate mobilization for the construction of the North American Water and Power Alliance. Number 5, immediate national mobilization for the construction of the NWAPA project.
Step 5 in the Program for Economic Recovery is perhaps the most crucial step of all, the immediate mobilization of our nation for the rapid construction of the North American Water and Power Alliance. Once our national government has reaffirmed the original intent of Hamilton's federal system by rescuing our struggling states and assuming their unpayable debts, we must offset this national debt as Hamilton did by investing federal credit into great projects for the physical development of the nation as a whole. The North American Water and Power Alliance, one of the most ambitious projects ever conceived of in human history, is the only project of sufficiently large magnitude to create the necessary multiplier effect in the productive powers of labor of our people to pull us out of the deep economic breakdown crisis which we are experiencing today. Under current conditions, 1/4 of all the precipitation that hits the ground in North America each year falls in one narrow corridor of the continent, with 800 million acre-feet of that water each year running directly into the Pacific and Arctic Oceans, unused by the biosphere on land and wasted. Meanwhile, large portions of the western half of the continent remain dry and barren. NWAPA will remedy this water imbalance by capturing and redirecting 20% of this wastewater runoff through a series of massive dams and tunnels, by far the largest of their kind in the world, to channel this water into a catchment system of new reservoirs and canals, including the Rocky Mountain Trench. This mass of water will then be lifted 2,400 feet through the Idaho Sawtooth Lift, requiring 26,000 megawatts of power to be provided by modular high-temperature nuclear reactors. It will then be distributed throughout the western states of the country, irrigating a total of 86,000 square miles of land, doubling the current irrigable acreage west of the Mississippi, refilling our aquifers, greening the great American desert, with every drop of water NWAPA brings onto land being recycled an average of 2.7 times as rainwater before returning to the sea. The construction of this project will create an estimated 4 million jobs directly. Add to this the almost 1.5 million additional jobs required to create the massive expansion of nuclear power needed to run the pumping systems for the water storage and transport, and we're looking at almost 6 million new jobs, practically overnight. Not only would this massive new workforce entail the immediate re-engagement of the highly skilled but now unemployed labor from the former industrial Midwest, but it will also serve as the living university to develop a broad-based new cadre of skilled workers from among the currently untrained and unproductive youth generation. Lesser skilled tasks, like site preparation and road construction, will also provide the adequate forum for a modern-day CCC to transport hopeless and desperate inner-city youth caught up in violence, drug use, and flash mobs away from their neighborhoods and communities and into disciplined, on-the-job training programs in regions which will be transformed by NWAPA. At a time when we are plagued with not only crushing unemployment among our people, but also a deep sense of despair and an utter lack of a national mission, the final realization of this project, originally crafted by the Ralph M. Parsons Company and presented to Congress in 1964, will serve to reverse the enforced retrograde motion in our economic platform, which we've experienced since Kennedy's assassination, a period of almost half a century during which time our nation has moved backwards in terms of technological and scientific potential. NWAPA will be a willful, sudden, and aggressive upshift in mankind's evolutionary platform, and will serve to restore a living understanding in the minds of our citizenry of what the human species can accomplish as a willfully creative species, endowed with the power to bring entirely new states of nature into being through his creative will. Through the greening of the deserts, with NWAPA, man will be assisting the biosphere to complete a process which it started 400 million years ago, when plants first moved from the seas onto land. Mankind has always extended the reach of life beyond where it itself could go, through soil cultivation, irrigation, and so forth. But now the task is not only to do this in the small, but to achieve it in the very large, on a planetary scale, through the harnessing and implementation of an entirely new science in practice, that of biospheric engineering. And not only will NWAPA represent a qualitative, fundamental change in the relationship of the human species to the planet, but the biospheric engineering of planet Earth through NWAPA must be seen as merely the antechamber, or experimental laboratory, for the real test of man's creative powers, the terraforming of entire planets, both within and eventually beyond our solar system. Therefore, Step 5, the affirmation of man's evolutionary imperative through an immediate national mobilization for the construction of NWAPA, will be the springboard to Step 6, the reawakening of our latent potential as a productive nation through the construction of other complementary great projects in parallel with NWAPA, transforming every citizen into a highly skilled producer, working in the common interest of the all towards the development of the nation as a whole.
Number 6, engage latent labor force for subsidiary projects such as transportation and nuclear.
The building of Step 5 of the Program for Economic Recovery of the NWAPA project will create the greatest change in the territory of the North American continent that mankind has ever embarked upon. It will mean the biggest dams ever built, the biggest tunnels, the greatest amount of earth moved, the biggest transformation of weather patterns man has yet accomplished. A vast majority of the elements of NWAPA's great dams and waterways are well outside the zone of existing civilization, which means they exist in the most desolate and isolated conditions imaginable. As in any wartime operation, logistical and supply lines will provide the necessary link between the intention to rebuild the nation through NWAPA and the means necessary to accomplish the task. In first approximation, this means bringing the materials and labor to the sites of construction. Along with a revival of existing transportation grids in the United States, this will mean a vast expansion, including building new lines and double and triple tracking existing lines. 3 primary zones of rail will mark the beginning. The first is the revival and expansion of existing rail lines between a revitalized industrial region formerly known as the Rust Belt out to the western regions to transport the goods needed for the construction into the NWAPA region. The second will be the construction of a new Alaskan-Canadian rail system, which will connect Alaska by rail for the first time with the rest of the continent, rail which will be needed to transport people and goods for construction and maintenance of the Nawapa system. The third zone will be for the well-planned Bering Strait Railroad. These railroads can immediately be electrified, phasing out reliance on unreliable liquid fuels. Immediately, the necessity to move thousands of tons of building materials to heights of 3,000 feet of elevation safely and quickly up the steep slopes of the Rocky Mountains will bring to the fore the necessity for application of maglev technology. Hovering at a controlled distance from their tracks and propelled through electromagnetic attraction and repulsion, operated from central control centers, and powered by abundant, consistent nuclear power, they can safely go up steep grades without derailing, and have virtually no weight constrictions, having been tested to bear 200 tons. Currently, the only maglev in the United States is a museum artifact sitting in the Denver airport. The perspective for a qualitative upshift in our entire transportation system is huge. Maglev speed is limited only by air resistance with current speeds of 361 miles an hour. The possibility for the use of vacuum tubes for passenger travel at distances such as between New York and Los Angeles at speeds of 1,000 miles per hour is an immediate possibility between major population centers. This technology becomes feasible within the bounds of this project. Maglev technology, as with StarTram, will also cooperate in concert with our revived extraterrestrial imperative, with an inexpensive means of propulsion into space using extended vacuum tube propulsion tracks, and to be used in space, as for example transportation on the moon where you won't have access to propulsion fuels. And with the moon as a basis for further travel, we can use linear maglev accelerator tracks to boost rockets and spaceships up to full speed to go to other planets and solar systems. This will be the future of transit on and off the planet. Nuclear power will also form a logistical backbone of operations to upgrade the quality of our power systems and increase the abundance of power. It will be nuclear power which will power the electrified rail grids. Nuclear power will power the maglevs. Nuclear power will power the other huge equipment involved in the project. And nuclear power will light the cities which house the vast number of laborers building Nawapa. The building up of these supply lines alone, in parallel with Nawapa, would gear up our national industries to the effect of reversing the current ongoing economic disintegration. We will need the entire intellectual and industrial might of the entire Rust Belt to build the transportation grids, rail, maglev, and beyond. And the components for new nuclear power plants will come primarily from a revived industrial region formerly known as the auto manufacturing region. Like New York State, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Missouri, and Michigan. This will also dovetail with the effects of Nawapa, where industry in our once again developing economy will be the single biggest user of water. The machine tool industry, now lying fallow or producing an overabundance of automobiles, can be retooled with minimal effort to produce the components for nuclear plants and maglevs. This region is full of skilled laborers and engineers capable of doing this high-skilled work. Currently, half of those capable of doing this work are unemployed. We have a crisis in skilled labor where we've essentially lost a generation, where baby boomers and older are retiring without leaving anyone to take their place. We will need to quickly bring up the youth generation through CCC-like programs to fill their places. This brings up the other aspect of the labor question. There will also be an estimated 6 million jobs to begin immediately throughout the Nawapa transportation network. We currently have a huge base of unskilled and unemployed labor and can immediately absorb that base here. Work on the initial 3 Nawapa rail zones can be built simultaneously and immediately with 2 tiers of laborers. While the first tier begins the massive operations of dirt moving and forest clearing to prepare the work sites, more selected cadres of workers will be selected, the cream of the crop, to begin training on the higher skilled jobs, training which may take investment cycles of up to 10 years. The vast number of workers who will go to work on these projects in the Midwest, in northern United States, in western and northern Canada, and in Alaska will all require housing, which brings us to the multiplier effect of building cities to support population increases in crucial construction zones and to develop those regions. In any of these regions, the value of the region will not be determined by its present state, but by its future state. With this approach, we can get into transforming regions of the biosphere which we have never touched, and we can begin to do what is taken up in Step 7, which is to transform the entire biosphere of the planet, beginning with extending this rail grid into an international network, sending lines both down through the Central and South Americas and across the Bering Strait into Russia and China, across Europe and down through Africa, when we will start to get the sense of a global human species. After that, the rest of the solar system and galaxy are ours to develop.
Number 7. Extended cooperation internationally to Mexico, Canada, Russia, China, and others.
Our neighbors to the north and south will be the first to share the physical benefits of an extended NWAPA program, while the rest of the world will immediately benefit from the fixed standard of currency exchange amongst the sovereign nations, which is required to implement NWAPA. As NWAPA is a decades-long project, the credit issued to build it must be made available at long-term low rates of interest, with long-term stability of the nominal value of the currencies in question. The US dollar will stand solid on the foundation of future development, and the rest of the nations will follow suit. The redirection of the captured runoff from the northernmost parts of the Western Hemisphere will provide an abundant supply of water for Canada as we direct that water towards points south. Dams, canals, tunnels, nuclear power plants, the transportation lines required to deliver the bills of materials to the job sites, new cities to service the growing workforce, all which is required of the United States in building NWAPA, is equally applicable to Canada. The factors of economic growth required to complete the project, such as the scientific and cultural development in the universities and laboratories, along with the development of skilled and semi-skilled operatives over the course of building NWAPA, apply as equally in effect for Canada as it does for the United States, and for Mexico as well. An extended NWAPA program is already on the books for our neighbors to the south, Plano, the Northwest Hydraulic Plan. By bringing the wasted runoff in the wet southern region of Mexico under the dominion of man, we will direct that captured water northward, where it is needed in the Sonora region, thereby attacking the North American desert on two fronts, from the north with NWAPA and from the south with Plano. As with NWAPA in the north, Plano will give our southern neighbors far more benefits than simply having more usable water for agriculture. Between Sonora and Nayarit is some tough territory, namely the Sierra Madre Occidental Range. Mastering this physical obstacle with the engineering required to move the water over, around, and through these mountains will have incalculable benefits for the people of Mexico in terms of the engineering and scientific capability engendered by the project. In this vein, the project will also have incalculable benefits for the world at large, as the samples obtained by tunneling these mountains will expand the fields of geology and paleontology both. With the completion of the extended North American Water and Power Alliance, the nations of North America will have achieved a benchmark in the field of applied biospheric engineering. We will not only have reclaimed those sections of the biosphere withered away by an expanding desert, but we will have brought the North American desert under the dominion of the biosphere, leading to the eventual elimination of that great desert altogether. We will be well on our way to solving global hunger. Turning back to points north, we find the hand of cooperation already extended from our neighbors to the west, in the form of the program to cross the Bering Strait by tunnel and bridge. This program is ready to go immediately, and with the physical economic activity fostered in Alaska by building NWAPA, the United States will be on good footing to clasp this hand of cooperation with our Russian neighbors. Again, the skills, materials, methods of working and living, bringing the harsh Arctic territories under the dominion of man will prove invaluable to mankind as a whole as we begin a serious program of the exploration of space. The Bering Strait project is an expression of an element of Russian thinking going back at least as far as Count Sergei Witte, the Russian Minister of Finance at the turn of the 20th century, who saw the Trans-Siberian Railway of his time as a road to peaceful, cooperative development between Russia and the rest of Asia. And it's clear from the World War II correspondence between President Franklin Roosevelt and Premier Joseph Stalin that an alliance between the United States and Russia would be an important element of FDR's vision of international cooperation in a post-World War II world. This approach to statecraft holds true today and is indeed the only approach to take to deal with the economic crisis which we face now. There is much more in motion in this direction today than could be competently covered here, including development programs between Russia and the rest of Asia. It is said of China and the United States that we are already married. The economies of our nations are intertwined in every way. And with a post-Obama American presidency, we will have the freedom to do our part to make that marriage fruitful. China has already been at work at home with the Three Gorges Dam, the first major maglev line, and has become involved in many projects abroad as well. Perhaps the most telling of these are the projects underwritten by China in Africa in late 2009, using assets denominated in US dollars, effectively giving physical value to the fictitious monetary assets. A China encouraged by a productive and future-oriented United States will gladly join in great development projects to her benefit and ours. Without this change in the direction of the United States, China will not survive the collapse of the transatlantic system. The approach outlined here will give us the basis to do much more than simply solve the economic crisis. What begins with Nawapa, we can bring into Africa and pull that continent out of the wretched condition which we've kept her in for far too long. In greening the Sahara Desert, we will bring life to her soils and dignity to her peoples. What begins with the Bering Strait project, we can bring to key points around the globe, connecting the people of all nations from the southern tip of Africa to the southern tip of South America and all points in between. The advances in the science of biospheric engineering and the fine art of statecraft will give us the foundation on which to explore space in a meaningful way, bringing the rest of the solar system and beyond under the dominion of the biosphere, under the dominion of mankind. This is a taste of the future which begins with the end of the Obama presidency.
So those are the conditions which are minimally required to be considered. If you want any recovery at all, this is probably the only thing that will work. Now, I've been forecasting for a long time, actually forecasting specifically since 1956, when they forecast the 1957 recession. And I was unique on that point at that time. I've been successful on other cases, again and again. And I don't really have any rivals in this department. So I think that it would be unreasonable not to take this shot, which I'm outlining here. I can't see any possibility of survival without, first of all, dumping this bum out of office. He's more than ripe for the ouster. Dumping the present system, absolutely, through the aid of Glass-Steagall. The Glass-Steagall reform in the original form with the same force and intention as the original Franklin Roosevelt movement. That's absolutely necessary. We need to apply the credit we get available to us for our states and for the national government to, first of all, to provide stability for the economy and actual growth patterns. We need to go further with large-scale projects based on the creation of a credit system as opposed to a monetary system. We will use money, but it will be designated as originally under a credit system, not a money system. We will take the credit we can generate and use that credit in part to put the economy back in functioning, but then beyond that we must have a major driver program based in large-scale infrastructure, which Nawapa is the most suitable case. You know? And through that program and through the accelerator program of scientific progress including, of course, the space program, reviving it and taking it beyond what it has been before. And have a science driver program which turns capital investment into growth facilities, into the driver for the expansion of wealth produced per capita and per square kilometer in the United States and other nations. That's the outline. It's a unique, and as far as I can see, as the world's leading forecaster, as of now, as a record now, this is the only thing that'll work. It's the best thing that'll work. Let's do it.